If you're interested in being a guest in the future, please let me know. Or if there is a guest you'd like me to reach out to or a topic you're interested in, please do get in touch. So if you've just joined, I'd like to remind you to please remain muted unless you intend to speak. And note once more, this event is being recorded and live streamed. Our guest today is Angie Jones. Angie is a senior developer advocate at Applitools and director at Automation University, and she's based in the Bay Area. She can be found on Twitter as TechGirl1908. Angie encourages audience participation throughout and will make space for questions during and after her talk. So with that, over to you, Angie.
Hello, everyone. All right. So again, I'm Angie Jones. I'm a senior developer advocate at Applitools, also the director of Test Automation University. So Test Automation University is like a global online platform with free courses on all things test automation. So if you haven't checked it out, now would be a great time to do so. And yeah, I blog about automation strategies and techniques at angiejones.tech. Today's talk is on visual testing or visual validation. So we're going to start off with a little game of Whodunit.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed. Constable, arrest Lady Smythe. But how did you know? Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you? Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed. Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
So I can't believe you all let the dead man get up and walk away. But actually, I can believe it because we all suffer with what's called inattentional blindness. And inattentional blindness is when you're so focused on a specific thing that you miss other things that might be happening around you, other things that are coming into your view, right? And this is especially true when we're talking about testing software. When we are testing a specific feature, we're so focused on that feature that we're not really looking at other things in the application. I had a woman tell me not long ago that she was testing her application daily, like multiple times a day, because her devs were cranking out features. And it wasn't until a customer pointed out that the entire color scheme of the application had changed that she realized that to be true. And even though she was looking at it on a daily basis, she was so focused on the feature itself that she was testing that she wasn't paying attention to everything else, right? So, how do we solve for inattentional blindness when we're talking about testing software? Well, you might think that, well, we should probably automate the test, right? Because if we automate the test, then we know that it's taking the same steps every time and it's looking for the same things every time. But what if I told you that automating your test was actually coding in the unintentional blindness? Because our scripts are more blind than we are, actually. If you think about it, your scripts are only looking for the things that you specifically specify, right? Now, when we are looking at our applications ourselves and we're testing them, even though we might be looking at a specific feature, there's a greater chance that if, let's say, like a pink elephant flew across the screen, that we would notice that. Our scripts would not, because we didn't tell it to look for that. Right? Other things besides a pink elephant that could go wrong that our scripts wouldn't notice are things like the text bleeding off the side or the edge of the page. This happens a lot when you talk about changing the different viewport sizes, or maybe a specific element that your customer needs to interact with is covered by some other element, and therefore your customer cannot interact with it. Or like maybe your some text is the same color as the background, right? So your scripts will look for that text, but not necessarily that it looks the way that it should look. So when I talk about visual testing and visual bugs specifically, sometimes people say, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we might look at that later," as if it's a nice to have. But can I tell you that visual bugs live in all types of applications? I see them every day. It's not just a nice to have to be able to catch these. It's really important. Here is a example. This is Cineworld. Cineworld is the world's second largest cinema chain. And they had a visual bug on the page where you go to store your credit card information. Here's the bug. So let's see. I was going to ask you to raise your hand. I don't know if we even have that functionality, but I'm going to speak on your behalf and say that none of us would probably store our credit card information on this screen. And yet, if we were to see this bug as testers, as developers, we would say, oh, that's, a weird bug, but it probably wouldn't be that high of a severity bug. Right? Because, okay, the labels are there or whatever. It's just not associated with the radio buttons the way we would expect it to be. And so, you might open this as the lowest severity, maybe one above. But your customers are not going to engage with this at all, right? They're going to look at this and just like Kim tweeted out, they're going to think that you didn't test this application or specifically this page, right? If you couldn't even get this part right, you didn't even notice this bug, then I'm going to think you didn't test like the back end stuff of me actually storing my credit card information, and who knows what's going on behind the scenes, right? But I have a theory. This is no small mom and pop company, right? Like I said, it's the second largest cinema chain in the world. So I don't think that they're just out here not testing their software. In fact, I think they probably automated this particular test. And if you automate this test, like I said, there goes the unintentional blindness, right? The labels are present. The radio buttons are present. And technically, this is functional. Our scripts would still be able to interact with this, but yet we see that this would be a very low conversion with customers. All right. Here's another one. This is OpenTable. So I used to live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I went back to visit. And when I went back to visit, I wanted to go to my favorite barbecue place because North Carolina is known for barbecue, right? So I go to OpenTable to make reservations. I want to get up with some of my old friends. So it's going to be a party of 7 of us. And I go on here to look for times for the pit, and they give me some options. So I go ahead and choose the 7 o'clock p.m. and I get a modal that pops up. And it took me a minute to figure out, like, what am I supposed to do here? Because there's nothing in the center. But if I look over here, I see that there are these 2 select buttons. So I thought that was really interesting. Why are there 2 of them? Why are they not aligned? And what exactly am I supposed to be selecting? So I did what any of you would do, and I opened Chrome DevTools and began to dig around the DOM to figure out like what were these buttons. And as I went through the DOM, I noticed that the labels actually were there. They were just as far away from the buttons as possible, which is why I didn't see them. Again, they probably have this test automated. We can't say that they're not testing this. And if this test was automated, technically, again, the labels are there, the buttons are there. This is functional. But from a user perspective, most of their customers are not engineers who know about Chrome DevTools and are going to dig around the DOM to figure out how to make this reservation. Now, I did because I love this barbecue, right? But most people wouldn't be able to do that. So I cringe at thinking about all of the business that this restaurant has probably lost with people trying to make reservations and not being able to. Again, script would pass. This would get pushed out to prod. Now, these aren't just one-offs. This happens to your favorite tech companies as well. Happens to Amazon. Right here, someone is trying to not only buy something, but increase the quantity, which is going to multiply the amount of money that they're going to spend. And yet, again, I talked about the viewport changes. So this is a mobile view, and we see that the drop down is getting cut off, right? Very bad experience. This is Facebook. So this is on their shopping page, right? Their marketplace. And we see the text going down the side. We see text kind of overlapping the images. We can't really read or make out what's anything. So again, this is a point of sale that is very, very unattractive and makes the user experience horrible, actually. Instagram, this one is my favorite one. The reason it's my favorite one is because this is a sponsored ad, which means someone paid good money to have Instagram show their content, and this is how it was displayed. Again, could have an automated test for this. The test is checking, is this text present? Is this text present? Is this text present? Yes, all of them are present. However, no one can read this or engage with it, right? So think about the money lost here. I'm sure Instagram needed to refund this company if it was a time sensitive promotion that they were doing. They lost that time. Twitter, again, your script check, is this text present? Yes, all of it is present. However, it misses the fact that it's all overlapping. And even our good friend Google, this one, I almost didn't include it because it doesn't seem like a huge deal, but I thought about it. This is, again, a point of sale, right? Which means they're not going to just allow this to stay there. And some highly salaried engineer needs to stop innovating new features to be able to track something like this down. So that's a gross misuse of their time and money. So the great news is we don't have to live like this. We can automate some visual validation as well. And that's what I'll show you today. Now, visual validation, I'll tell you what it is. It's where you take a picture of your application when it's in the state that you see it as the human being. You're like, yep, this looks great. I want it to always look like this. You take a picture. On regression runs, you run the visual checks again, and it takes more pictures and compares the new picture with the baseline picture that you took originally to determine if there are any differences. Now, this isn't a totally new approach. Visual testing has been around for a while, but the technique that we were using in the industry before is not great for testing. So we would just compare the pictures like pixel by pixel, right? And we come to realize that this is really flaky. Let me show you some examples. So here is a Google search, and we say, in the first picture, this is our baseline. This is how we want the app to look. We take this picture. And then in the second picture, we see that the test has failed now because it's different. It's detected some differences between these pictures. Who can tell me why this failed? Anybody see the difference? And just jump in.
Just like the borders of the button, one of the buttons.
Yeah, so that Google search button, we see that one has like a border now and the text is bold now, right? So the thing is, when you hover over that button, then that's the effect. So if the mouse in your automated script happened to sit on that button when the picture was taken, now you have a failure. So this is really annoying if you think about this as part of like a CI pipeline, and these tests are gating the builds, and you have a failure like this that is nothing really, and you stop the build and people have to come investigate, and yeah, very, very annoying. Here's another one. Who can see what's different in this one? Why did this one fail? Anyone?
Gonna guess the cursor.
Yeah. So the cursor is solid behind the word bad, but the cursor is not present in the second picture. Well, cursors blink, right? So if it happened to take the picture when the cursor was solid in the first picture and then not solid in the second, you have a difference with the pixels. So again, you don't want this kind of noise in your CI pipelines, right? So fortunately, Applitools has come out with a smarter way to do these visual validations, and they're using machine learning to do so that it can look at those images just as we would as a human being to determine which failures are, relevant. Okay, so here is another little game. I'm not going to let you all play because you let the dead man walk away in the first game. But if we look at this spot the difference, this is a typical, spot the difference game. Pick out all the things that are different. Now, I ran this through both the pixel to pixel comparison and I ran it through the machine learning one with Applitools, which is called eyes. And I wanted to see the differences there. So when I ran it through pixel to pixel, we noticed that everything is highlighted here, right? It's a bunch of noise and it's not exactly what we're looking for. Versus when we run it through machine learning algorithm, it is able to pick out the differences just as we would as human beings. Okay. So let's go ahead and add this to an existing code base. What I love about the visual testing is that I can integrate it with my existing code. I don't have to like start over from scratch. Okay. So first, let me show you the application that we're going to work with today. So this is an automation bookstore. It's a single page application that I put together with like 8 of my favorite books on testing. So the way that this works, there's a filter here. You can search this by partial title or full title or like author or whatever. So for example, let's say I put in the word testing. I can see this book that has testing, or if I put in test, I see all the books that have test in the title. All right, so that's the application. And then let's look at a couple of tests. So I have 2 tests so far. One that searches by full title. So I'll put in Agile testing, search for that, make sure that the book is visible, and then make sure it's the only book that's visible. Now let me go into this is book visible method. And I'm using Java and Selenium here, but this works with whatever you have, whatever language, whatever automation framework. Okay, so in this is book visible method, it takes the title of the book, it finds all of the visible books, and then it goes through those to see if any of those titles match the one that was passed in, right? So if we look at this application again, and let's just do the test, Agile testing, and we look at this. Based on what I showed you, does this seem efficient? Chime in. Anybody see like anything, like maybe the test is not capturing or not validating? I'll show you the test again. Or this is book visible method. So we make sure that the title is what it's supposed to be and make sure that's the only book that's visible. Anything missing from the test? Okay. So I used to think like this was a good test, especially since I made sure it was the only one that was visible. But once I started doing visual testing, I realized how much I was missing in my current test, right? So just making sure the title is there. There's a lot more on this page than just this title, right? What about the authors? There's no checks in our test for that. What about the price? Nothing there. What about the book cover, right? That's probably one of the most important pieces of this, because when I go on Amazon to search for books and I get a result list back, I usually glance over it for the book cover because I know what the book cover looks like. So that's pretty important. If this was missing or the wrong book cover, that could lead to a decline in sales of the book or something like that. So anyway, none of this stuff is being checked in our test. So we see that our test is a little bit inadequate and has some blindness already. Now we could add some additional checks there to make sure this price is right, make sure this title is there, maybe make sure that the image is at least present and it's the right source or whatever, but not really what it looks like. We couldn't really do that with what we have today. So I could add the code, but that's going to be much more code that I'm adding and much more code that I need to maintain, right? And in addition to that, I'm still going to miss things. Like I said, the book cover and then anything else really, right? All right. So that was our first test. Let me show you the second one. The second one is going to search by a partial title. So this one's going to put in the word test. It's going to expect these books to come back. Make sure that each one of those books is visible and then that it's the right number of books that come back, right? So same issues here with this one. Now let me show you something else. I'm going to put my dev hat on for a moment and I'm going to go inside of the application. Where is my, here we go. I'm going to go inside of the application here. And let's say, I just learned a little bit of CSS animation and I want to add a little effect here, right? So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say transform. I'm going to do like a little bouncy rotate or so I think. And let's save that guy. Now, if I look at my application, let's see what that looks like. And we see with one line of code, I've literally flipped this app upside down. But that's okay because we have tests, right? So our developers, what are they doing? They are making changes. They're not coming to the app and doing like thorough testing or whatever. A lot of times, especially if there's tests already available, they'll go ahead and check it in because they know that the tests are going to run. So let's see if our test will even catch this bug, right? So I'm going to run both of them. Uh-oh, did I mess something up? Oh, there we go. Going. Is it going? Let's try it again. All right, there we go. All right, so both tests have run and we see that they both have passed. Unfortunately, that's not good. While I love a green test as much as the next person, these tests should have failed because we literally flipped the application on its head and it didn't catch it, right? So I'm going to comment this out. Let's fix this bug and then we're going to introduce the visual testing. So I'm going to go to, I could add the visual testing right here to the individual test, but I'm going to add it at a higher level so that we can use it anytime we want. So I'm going to go in this base test. And we're going to go ahead and declare the eyes API. And the eyes API, again, is the Applitools API that we're going to use to do the visual testing. All right, and then in our setup, this is just something that launches the browser, goes to the page. So after we do all of that, I'll go ahead and instantiate eyes. And then let's create a little method here to do the visual testing. All right, so I'm going to say public void, and we'll just call this like validate window. There's 3 steps here. First, I say open your eyes. So we go eyes.open. And inside of here, this takes 3 arguments: the driver, the name of the application. So we'll just call this Automation Bookstore. And then the name of the test. So since I put this at a higher level, there's no telling like what this test name is going to be. So let me do a little hack. Close your eyes. I'm going to say whoever calls me, use their name. All right. So we say open your eyes. Next thing we say, go ahead and check the window for me. And that'll take the picture. And then that's it. We say close your eyes. We're done, right? So I'm going to call this method from my test. So we go in here and let's put it in this second one, right? So I'm just going to say go ahead and validate window. And that'll make sure the screen looks okay. Now, when I'm validating the window, this is something that I noticed. What I initially wanted to use visual testing for is just, make sure my app looks good, right? But in making sure the app looks good, that's like a super of functional testing as well. Meaning it's going to make sure that that's the only book that's there. So I no longer need this check. And it's going to make sure that all the books that I'm expecting to be visible are the ones visible, because that's what's going to be in the picture, right? So I don't need this, which means I no longer need this array or this list. So now my test is 2 lines. It got really short, right? So I was like, wow, this helps me like write tests a whole lot faster. Just write the actions, and then I don't have to think of every single thing. Like I said, the author, the price, the image, and all of this stuff. I don't have to think about that anymore. I can just say, just validate the window, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and run this one with the visual testing. All right, there's our test. And what this is doing is going to take a little picture and it's going to send this out to the Applitools server. Okay, I'm really done here. I'm going to show you this step only because I want you to see it, but I don't have to do this. So let me show you the dashboard of Applitools. So this is my Applitools dashboard. This is where my pictures went, and this is what was stored as my baseline. You see here that it's marked as new or whatever. I don't have a baseline yet because this is my first one, but when this test runs again, this becomes my baseline, right? I don't have to do anything. I didn't even have to come here. I'm just showing you what it looked like. So after running it, I was just good to go. And it stores all my images in the cloud for me, all right? Now, I'm going to go ahead and flip that book again. And we're going to run the visual test again to see if we have better luck in catching a flipped application. All right, so this is running again. All right, again, it's going to take a picture here. It's going to send this out to the Applitools cloud, and it's going to compare that with the first picture that we taken. And we notice here that there's a failure, which we didn't get before. And that failure says it's a diffs found exception. It tells us the test of the application, and then it gives us like a link to it. I already have that open, so I'll just go with what I have. So we look here and notice that this test now says unresolved. And I kind of like that because, like I said, this is using machine learning. And a common question I get is, will AI take my job? So I like that this is assisting me. AI is assisting me in testing. It's basically saying, hey, human overlord, oh wise one, the test has failed, but it could be because of some differences, or it could be because, well, not differences. It could be because of a bug, or it could be because of an intended change. So human, you come and you look and see. Now, when I come here, I can see that, oh my goodness, yes, they've highlighted basically all the differences. So every book is different because they're flipped upside down. So good job, AI. All I need to do here is click this thumbs down, and that will fail the test. So now this test is marked as failed. Okay. Let's everybody come off mute and let's discuss this. So what are some pros and cons of validating the entire window in this way? Let's start with the pros. Anybody have any pros?
You're going to catch everything that's changed in the page.
Right. So you can catch everything that's changed in the page, which means you have removed that unintentional blindness from your scripts. Now it has eyes, it can see. Very good. Anybody else? All right. What about some cons? Anybody have cons?
Seems like taking the screenshot and uploading it, it adds a delay.
Yes. So this is slower than if you were not taking the picture, right? If we were just doing our functional testing, even if we probably added all of that code to do all of the additional assertions, it would probably run faster than the image-based comparison. I guess the trade-off is we don't have to write and maintain that code, but yes, it definitely is a bit slower. Anybody else? All right. So the pro, I think, is also a con. The pro meaning, okay, I can check everything on this entire page. And the con is, wait, I'm checking everything on this entire page, right? So you're checking that this is correct. You're checking that the title is correct. The pro is, okay, yeah, you had a pink elephant here. You get to catch that. The con is, let's say this is not a pink elephant, but there's active development on this page, and you had tests for the things that were considered like done, but you don't want the entire page because there's going to be some uncertainty there. The great thing about eyes is it's pretty flexible. So I can check the entire window, or I can check like a specific element. So let's go back to our test here. First, let me fix this bug before I forget. Okay. All right. So back to our test. Let's look at the second one now. I mean, the first one. Search by a full title, this Agile testing. So this is just one book. Maybe I just want to verify this one book and not the entire page. So let's go back to our base test, and we're going to add another similar method here to just verify the element itself. So let's say element. Now the open will stay the same, the close will stay the same. Instead of doing check window, we're going to say check element. And we see here we can pass in, we have a couple of different options here. We can pass in like a by selector, we can pass in an actual web element, and like some variations of all of that. So I'm just going to say, we'll say if you're going to call us, go ahead and give us a by, and then we'll pass it on to Applitools for you. All right. So let's go ahead and use this in this search test. And so I'm going to say validate element, and I already have like the ID for that book stored. So I'll just get that. And again, I don't have to make sure it's the only book and all of this stuff. So I can probably delete some of this. Let's delete. And this is no longer used multiple times. So I don't need a variable. So again, nice and simple test. All right, let's run this one. Now here, we're going to see, even though like the whole page is here, what eyes is going to do is find that element on the page and only take a picture of it. So let's see what that looks like in the dashboard. All right. Okay. Confirm. So new test here, and we see, boom, that it only took a picture of the element itself. All right. With some pros and cons of using this approach.
Well, I would say a pro is that we're only having a smaller section of the screen, so it should be a little bit quicker to take that snapshot and store it.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Anybody else?
Right, isn't this reintroducing our inattentional blindness?
It is introducing to some degree, right? So it is okay for this specific book, like, okay, we're going to get everything we need to get checked about this book, but about the application as a whole, or at least this page as a whole, we are reintroducing that unintentional blindness. So if I were to come here, and let's say that I typed in, what did we type in? Agile testing. Let's say I typed in agile testing here. And let's pretend that the filter is broken, meaning none of the books are going to go away. They're all just going to stay right here. That test is still going to pass, because what it's going to do is find this book, ignore everything else that's going on the page, and say, yep, this book looks beautiful, right? So it's missing a lot of the other stuff. Now, what I recommend is, my recommendation is, if you can, if there's not like active development going on or anything like that, go ahead and take the entire page. But when you need to scope down, you have to really think about this, right? Even though we're using AI to assist us in testing, that doesn't mean that we don't have to think as engineers. So if we're going to scope this down, we have to think about, okay, what are my blind spots here? So I could do something like not scope it to this book, but maybe scope it to this entire area of books, so that we make sure that this whole area looks okay. Or I can couple it with some functional assertions too. So instead of deleting all of those functional assertions, I can probably add some back. Let's see. At least this number of books, right? So I could say, make sure that there's only one book, and then make sure that book looks good. That way, at least I'm catching more, right? So there's a couple of ways that you can get around that. Anything else on, let's back to it. Anything else on the element checks? Okay. So a common question I get is, well, Angie, what about if I have dynamic content, right? Then certainly I can't use like image comparison with that. And actually you can. That's just how flexible that the eyes API is, right? So I can, I'm going to write a new test. Let's go to our test. And let's say we're going to test. We're not even going to search. We're just going to test like dynamic layout, right? So I'm not going to do a search. I'm just going to say validate window. Let's go ahead and run this one time in its current state. So we have a baseline here. And then after we do that, I'm going to change the order of the books so that it's not quite the same. All right, so we get in our baseline here. This goes up to the server. Boom, that's saved. Beautiful, great. All right, now let's go back in our application, and I'm going to go to the JS file this time. I'm going to change the order of, let's say, 2 of these books. All right, so now they're in a different order. If I were to run this right now, we already know, of course, this is going to fail because it's going to detect some differences, but I can change the algorithm, the comparison algorithm. So Applitools calls these algorithms match levels. So I can say set my match level, and there's actually 4 of them. So the 4 match levels are, one of them is exact, which does pixel-to-pixel comparison, but I already told you that's an awful idea, so don't ever use that one. There's also strict, which is done by default, so that's why we didn't have to specify before. There's content, which goes colorblind, and it just verifies your content, not the colors. So this is really helpful in cases where maybe you have custom pages, like your user can change the color of their profile or stuff like this. You're just worried about the content, not necessarily the color. And then the one that I'm talking about is layout. So the layout one allows you to verify just the layout of the page. So this is great when you have data that can change, or dynamic data. So let's go ahead and run this one again now that the books are changed. Now we used to use this at Twitter when I worked there. We would use this for the tweets because we're not exactly sure what the tweets are going to say, but there's some layout here. So what this is doing is basically using machine learning in a different way to detect what's the pattern on the page there. I got a failure. That's not good. Let's see what's going on. Resolve. Okay, so we look at this. The cucumber book. Okay, so it spotted like something. I don't even know what this is. I think I can do. Might not be able to. Yeah, so it shouldn't have done this. It should just pass because I'm using this layout mode. So I'll take this back to the team to see what's going on. But what's happening here is this book has moved to a different position, and notice like it didn't catch the entire book here. For whatever reason, it's catching like something right here. I don't know what, but what this did was use machine learning to look at the layout of the page. So it's doing things like finding patterns in the page. So it looks like we have these squares that are this distance apart, and all of them have some purple thing in the corner, followed by like some white text on it, right? Some bolded text here, followed by some not bolded text. So determining like what are the patterns here, and then determining like if that is a failure or not. So in this case, this is not a failure. I can say, no, this is fine, and just do a thumbs up and save it. And now this test can be marked as passed. All right. So what are some pros and cons of the dynamic? Other people who use this are like news sites, for example, like, they know that their articles are going to change by like the hour, but the structure of the page remains the same, and that's what they're checking for. Pros and cons? No pro or con? Okay, you all are generous. All right, so pros here is that I can use it for dynamic content, obviously. So it doesn't have to be the same content. And so if my test data is changing, or even my prod data, if I'm running against prod, then I can utilize this. The cons is that it's not checking the data itself, only the structure of the page, right? So for example, if with this switcheroo, the authors were the same, like this one had Seb Rose as the author or something like that, it would not catch that because it's not looking at that level of detail when using the layout match level, right? If we were to look at this, we could preview other match levels. So if we previewed this as strict, we could see that it would have caught that these two books were out of order. But with the layout one, it knows to ignore that fact. So that's a good thing. The again, the con is you're not testing the data. So again, you're adding like a little bit of blindness here. I only use layout for like maybe smoke testing purposes. Like I want to make sure the app is up and looks okay, and then I do more thorough testing. Or I'll use it in a case where I know I'm going to do like some back end testings, right? So I'm going to call some APIs or do some database calls. And then I just want to, that's where most of my verification is going to go. And I'll just do a quick little, all right, make sure that the app looks okay kind of thing. All right. Okay. Any questions thus far? I have one more thing to show you, but I want to stop in case there are any questions. Okay. No questions. All right. So let's move on. The last thing I want to show you is about cross-platform testing. So this visual testing opens up a pretty interesting avenue as far as cross-platform testing. So I don't know if you all do cross-platform testing, but it's horrible. It's not a fun activity to do, right? So sometimes across different browsers, we see things change across different devices, across different viewports. New elements are introduced, some are taken away, and so our code has to, our automated testing has to account for all of these different things, which becomes like a headache. Not only that, was probably the most annoying thing is that the return on investment is really low, meaning that our cross-platform scripts are not even catching the bugs. And that's because they're missing the visual testing piece, because that's where visual bugs lie, in these viewport changes. That's their favorite place to be, right? So Applitools has come out with this visual grid, which will allow you to run your tests across all of the configurations that you want to. And you can do so without actually executing all of the steps. So the way that this works is you write your test as if you were writing it against one configuration. You're writing it to run on Firefox, right? In your regular desktop mode, whatever. You don't have to think about all of the other pieces to this. You call the visual testing when you want to, give it all of the configurations that you want to check against. And as opposed to running your test on all of those things, it runs your test the one time on Firefox, grabs the state of the application, meaning the DOM, all of the resources and assets that go with it, meaning the CSS, the JavaScript, everything, and then propagates that state of your application across all of the configurations. And it does this in parallel. So it makes it really fast to run these tests. And you don't have to do all of the setup and everything that your scenario requires. So I will go ahead and show you our application. I've already run it. Let me show you just how you would specify the configurations. So I have this in another little file here, this visual grid config. And we see here, we specify which browsers I want: Firefox and Chrome, and like desktop, and then big monitor mode. Also supports IE and Safari. And then, an edge. And then devices, I can do like any of the ones that are supported by the simulators. So I'll say like iPhone 10, and I want that in landscape and portrait as well as galaxy, right? And let's go to where I've already run this so you can see it. I can filter this stuff down too. So let's see where I have something called grid. And yep. So here are my grid tests, and I can, look at any of these. So this is Chrome desktop, and this is Chrome larger, and this is Galaxy S5. One in portrait, one in landscape, same for iPhone, and then Firefox desktop as well as big monitor. There have been people, they are loving this feature. I love it as well. People are writing blog posts like, look, I ran 100 UI tests in like 20 seconds across, 29 configurations or whatever. So it's pretty cool. All right, so that's all that I have. I'm going to open it up now for any questions that you all may have.
So I'm curious to learn of other than the additional time that it takes to process and return a response on the visual testing. What other downsides are there to this?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
What are the other downsides that people see with visual validation, or is it all positive?
I'm sorry, my internet kind of like went out a little bit. So I heard you say other than the timing, and then what else did you say?
Other than the introduced delay, are there any other downsides that you see to visual validation?
Okay, so sometimes it becomes like too easy, and then people start slapping them everywhere. So this is something that I see out in the field. People will say, oh, let's just put the visual checks everywhere, and they're putting them in like every single test. And remember how I said, like, if you're going to scope things down or do things like this, you need to be cognizant of what blind spots you have. And I feel like people miss that a lot. It becomes just like, oh yeah, let's just slap this everywhere and it's going to check everything or whatever. Versus like thinking about, okay, should I really be checking everything? Should I be scoping this down? If I do scope it down, then, what other checks do I need to add, or how big or how small should I scope it? But that's more of like a culture issue than anything. Another issue I see in the field is kinds of, how like I went and I saw that issue, and then I said, well, this is not a bug, and I did a thumbs up to say that it passed. So sometimes people just go and like glance at it, and then they just thumbs up everything. Oh, it's not an issue. Thumbs up, thumbs up. They just want to get the build out the door, right? Versus really looking at it. They've introduced something to kind of help with that a little bit. So as opposed to you trying to eyeball it, let me see if I can find a test to show what I want to talk about. Maybe this one. Okay, yeah. So like say this little timing issue right here. This is fields. There's this root cause analysis thing where I can look at, let's see if I can get this to work. How do you work this thing? Oh, this is Appium. I don't think it works on Appium. But anyway, there's like a root cause analysis that you can basically say, okay, tell me what changed right here if I couldn't really see it. And it'll show you like exactly what changed in like your CSS or your HTML that caused this to be a failure. Another thing I didn't tell you all is you can ignore like any parts of the screen. So let's say you didn't want to do dynamic content here, but like this status bar, for example, It's always going to change. The time is going to change, the apps that are open, all of that. So I can basically put like an annotation there to say, always ignore this region. So I do that on things like all of my mobile stuff, I do this. And also with like advertisements or things like that are in the page, I can say, just ignore this region altogether. We don't need to verify that part. And I can do this either on this dashboard, or I can do it programmatically. So programmatically, I use that when doing things like this mobile one, because in every single mobile test, I'm going to need to have that status bar ignored. So I don't want to have to come in here and draw rectangles on every single test. So I can do it programmatically to say, before you even run this test, know that I want that part ignored. And you do it the same way by just like specifying the locator of that. So that was a long answer to your question, but hopefully it was helpful. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, I had a question. Is there any plans for this, or maybe not plans, but is there any thoughts of being able to run it without the cloud service?
Yeah, you can run, there's public cloud, everything is safe. There's private cloud, safer. And then there's on-premise. Now, everything I showed you today, it comes with the free account. If you want it private or on-premise, then that comes with the upgraded accounts. So we have like a lot of customers that are like banks, financial institutions, medical institutions. Those folks are very, very careful, and regulations specify they need to do stuff on premise. So that's what they do.
Okay, so it's just like they have access to a separate kind of instance of this.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
just for them. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, that is all I have. Let me give you my contact information in case you think of anything else. So there is my website. You can contact me through there, or you can reach me on Twitter. I pretty much live there, TechGirl1908. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angie. And thanks to everybody else for attending. Thanks again. Take care, everyone, and look out for another event, hopefully scheduled soon.
Thanks, Angie.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.